Sri Sai Ram. Good morning, perfection students of English. Today we have a very nice story called The Gardener. And this story is an in-depth story written by P. Lankesh, who wrote in Kannada. And he was a very profound writer and novelist. And this one fellow named Raghavendra Rao, knew that these works were fantastic. So he translated them into English. And the book that he translated was translated in 1993, which was a book about stories that P. Lankesh had written. So the story here, which is called The Gardener, was written before 1993. So it's at least 27 years old. And this is important because in the story itself, you'll see the time that P. Lankesh was writing. He was very up to what was going on in the world. So we'll start the topic today, chapter 7, with the pre-reading activity. Okay, so the pre-reading activity, we have, this is P. Lankesh, and the pre-reading activity. Is there a difference between competition and rivalry? This is the major theme of this whole story. What started to be competition between the two gentlemen, Tamana and Basavaya, turned into an intense rivalry. And rivalry, of course, each person wants to do away with the other person. It's not a good state to be in. And since this was written at least 27 years ago, now the society has realized that even competition is not so good. It's better to have cooperation. If these two farmers had cooperated, they could have farmed a lot more land, they could have cut their expenses and produced more food. But this story, as you know, is written almost 30 years ago. So the second question we have is, can you think of different factors that motivate human beings to lead their life? This is the story. Why are we here? Why do we get up every day? So I asked my class, my science class, what are the reasons for you to get up? And they came up with a variety of answers. They said, first of all, they want worldly success. They want to make money, have a house, a number of different things. And then they said they like to go to band. They got up in the morning to go to band and practice their instruments and become good in the arts. And then one boy said self-realization, the realization of why you are really here. So the reasons for living go all the way from bodily health, secular knowledge, all the way to spiritual knowledge. So Lankesh starts this story, okay? What happened was he saw a man in a coconut grove, and the story came to him in a flash. And this is what happens. Many authors, many poets, they get a revelation of truth. They can see the whole story right in front of their eyes, or the whole poem in front of their eyes, and then they just write it out. Usually they've prayed or contemplated before this happens. So Lankesh states, elaboration can only impoverish this account and make it less authentic. So he's not going to put his own ideas into this account. He's going to tell you exactly what he saw when he saw this old man. He's not going to put any of his own ideas into it. This is coming right from his higher source. I conceived this story in a flash, and it has its genesis in my chance encounter with an old man. Genesis, of course, means the beginning. Like the Bible, the first book is Genesis. This old man was standing in a grove near Chanapatra. His eyes were suffused. His eyes were so expressive. They were suffused, completely suffused with the strange memories and native intelligence. He looked like a wise person. He stood there, a tall figure, hair gone gray. You know, the older sadhus get gray hair, and they've been around and they have a lot of experience, and they want to share this intelligence with you. A long beak-like nose and strong muscular arms. You could see he'd worked all his life. In one hand, he had a spade used to tend coconut trees, a newspaper tucked under his other arm. He was a laborer, overseer, philosopher, all rolled into one. He came to this garden one day after walking hundreds of miles. We're talking at least 200 to 300 miles. That's almost 500 kilometers. He walked away from his land. He was a very prosperous farmer, and we'll find this out later on. And he walked up to this plantation, which was about 10 acres. And the owner of the plantation needed a person exactly like him. A few words were exchanged. They both knew it was destined that this old man would come and help this owner with his farm. The old man was really useful. He stayed on. He was well versed in agriculture and could understand the problems of workers. Because he had dealt with many workers on his own farm, he knew what the workers needed, and he paid attention to them. The petty thefts in the garden came to an end. The income of the garden rose dramatically. Because of more money coming in, there was a perceptible change in the lifestyle of the owner. The plantation expanded, but the owner became lethargic. Lethargic, another word for a little bit lazy, and shied away from hard work. His wife found all of this very strange. She found it very strange and hard to decide whether the old man's arrival was for better or for worse. Her husband's wealth and social prestige had risen higher. He acquired a number of friends in the next town and an equal number in his own village. When you have a lot of money, you have a lot of friends. Even though he had precious little to do because the old man was taking care of the farm, his life became crowded with colorful events. When you have a lot of money, you're invited to fairs and all of these productions that people do. So she became apprehensive about his adultery. This is one of the worst sins a married man can commit. And he committed it. He had money, he had time, he would not come home at night, and umpteen other vices. Umpteen means many other vices. Drinking, smoking, staying out late, not taking care of your family. Cultivated lately, thanks to his newly acquired clout. Clout, money is clout. If you have money, you can usually have a lot of friends and tell people what to do. Their farm, which was merely 10 acres, that's all they had to begin with, had grown beyond imagination. So many more acres were added on, and then workers were hired, and they produced a lot of things, okay? A lot of mangoes, coconuts, so many things, and they were getting a lot of money. That was fine, the woman thought, the wife of the owner, but their life was gradually getting out of hand. When she was in this fix, okay, this took a while. It took a year or so, maybe 2 years. She was in this fix. She didn't know what to do with her own life. One day, the old man met her, and he behaved as though he knew about her plight. Because he had gone through a similar experience, he knew what she was thinking, okay? So he smiled at her and brought down an offering of tender coconuts. He went to one of his coconut trees, got 2 nice coconuts, and with his spade, cut the top off and offered her a coconut. And he sat down on the embankment of the well. They were on the well. It was a nice place to sit. She had no alternative because he's the manager of their farm. She had to sit with him to be polite. Now, the time of day was sunset. The sun was just slipping away. And the rays were coming, and they were reaching the well, okay, coming through all of these jackfruit trees and coconut trees. And as we all know, the spiritual hours are from 4 to 8 in the morning and 4 to 8 in the evening. It was a very nice time to be talking about heavy matters and matters of life. So at this point, the old man, Tamana, comes and starts his narrative. So the story up to this point was being told by Pila and Kesh. But from here on till almost the end, the story is told by Tamana. He's telling his own story. The old man began his narrative. In a far-off place, there once was a man named Tamana. So he's telling the story about himself. And he had everything. He had 10 acres of wetland. That's what the owner and the owner's wife had, was 10 acres. So he had a comfortable house on the 10 acres. People were ready, too ready to do his bidding. He had a lot of workers, a lot of friends. They all wanted him to be successful. But the most important thing among his possessions was his rival, and he calls the rival's name Sangoji. Okay? Now he's trying to talk to this owner's wife in a way that she'll understand. And so he's trying to make up a story about his own life, so he makes up a name, Sangoji. But then he feels a little funny. After proceeding this far, the old man fumbled for words, as though he had committed a mistake. She was listening. She felt like going away, saying, "This is none of my concern." Her ego wanted to leave before he got into the heavy stuff, okay? However, unwilling to hurt the old man, who was their manager, she continued to sit quietly. The old man went on. He corrected himself. He goes, "No, his name was not Sangoji, it was Basavaya." He expressed his amazement at how facts take on such varied guises when they are narrated as fiction. When you tell a story about yourself and you tell it as a fiction, it's amazing how your mind can run away with itself and not tell the truth. But the truth is the best thing because it comes across with a feeling of truth and a feeling of caring. Let that be. Let us assume his name was Basavaya. He was Tamana's rival. Now Tamana really didn't have a rival until Basavaya started to compete with him. Then they assumed this position of rivals to each other. If Tamana bought 4 acres adjacent to his land, Basava followed suit. He would buy 4 more acres, or as many acres as he could buy. If one had 10 friends, the other acquired 15 admirers. To begin with, all this looked like healthy competitions. However, gradually it rose to such a pitch that there was no land left in the village for them to buy. All the land belonged to either Tamana or Basavaya. They bought up everything. They wanted to be bigger than the other person. Tamana had 1,000 acres and Basavaya only had 800 acres. Basavaya could not tolerate this. He became angry. He wanted to have more land than Tamana. So he sent word to Tamana asking him to sell him 200 acres. But Tamana, who's a rival, did not agree. He said, as a counteroffer, "I'm willing to buy all of your land." Basavaya was mad with rage. You get angry and then eventually you get mad. You just go a little crazy. You're so mad, this rival of mine wants all my land. He's never going to get it. I'm going to get some of his land. And when you're mad, of course, you don't think properly. So what Basavaya did, he went along with his people, all of his workers, okay, and grabbed 200 acres from Tamana and put a fence around it and said, "This is my land." Tamana, of course, had bought the land. It was his land. He could not tolerate that invasion. So he figured, what am I going to do? He talked with his people, and they advised him. Because there were so many of them, the quarrel between these two had sucked in all the supporters. Everybody was on one side or the other, either Tamana or Basavaya. Tamana was advised by his supporters about the various means available for getting back his land. There was a court of law. One could also go to the police. If you did not want that, there's a number of people that will jump on Basavaya and beat him up and get the land back for you. Such a war had become virtually inevitable because the parties were so angry against each other. But Tamana sat back a little bit. He started to reflect. He started to think, okay? He was in search of an idea that would annihilate his rival, Basavaya, completely. He wanted to get rid of his rival. So he hit upon the idea of composing all his experiences in the forms of ballads, songs, and singing them everywhere, and making copies of these songs and giving these songs out to people. Now the rivalry between Tamana and Basavaya started moving away from things that were visible towards the invisible abstract domain. What is the abstract domain? That's the domain of the mind, okay, and thoughts. He's going away from the physical to the abstract. And now we'll go to the next slide. Basavaya had no answer to this. He also tried to sing, but could not. Each one of us is born with certain qualities. Some people can sing, some people cannot sing. So what Basavaya did is he performed his agricultural tasks more diligently. He worked harder on all of his acres. He produced more material. This too was no answer to Tamana. Tamana didn't care. He didn't care what Basavaya was doing. He was happy singing songs. Tamana's reputation started spreading all around. His songs started to make a mention of Basavaya's cruelty and his meanness. Scholars of folklore were after him. Everybody wanted to be in touch with Tamana. He was getting very famous. Critics started analyzing and translating his songs and earned their share of fame. Just like in this story, P. Lankesh was the smart person who was writing the story, but Raghavendra Rao did the translation and got a certain amount of fame from that. Basavaya watched helplessly, all consumed by anger. He was so angry, he didn't know what to do. So he encroached more and more into Tamana's land. But Tamana did not notice any of these activities. Art had become the raison d'etre. Raison d'etre is a French collocation which means reason for life. And many other languages use this, the reason for life, raison d'etre of his life. Art was the reason he was living. He was felicitated as the best poet of his times. The whole area wanted to have Tamana's poems and stories and ballads sung at their places, and they wanted to hear them. Basavaya shrunk in humiliation. And so he started filling his life. All he knew was to make money, all right? And so he started filling his life with all kinds of material wealth. He got a palatial mansion, a huge place built for himself. And then he hired a number of people just to go around and brag about Basavaya. Just like kings used to do in their court, they would have certain people who would go and expound on the glory of the king. He bedecked himself with gold and diamonds and other precious stones. But his house looked dull and empty because Tamana's books were not there. Basavaya would not let any of Tamana's ballads or books come into his house, because he was the rival. But the visitors told him when they came, "Where's Tamana's books? Where's Tamana's music? We want to hear it." So then Basavaya said, "Well, I'm not going to listen to Tamana, but I'm going to invite other scholars, poets, and musicians to my big palace." And this was his way of investing this huge home with meaning. One day, sometime later, time was passing, one day Basavaya came to know that Tamana was ill. Word gets around quickly when a rich person is not feeling good. At that point, Basavaya found a means of surpassing Tamana. He goes, "Wow, I'm healthy and my rival is sick. Oh boy, this is good. Health is wealth. You may sing and write ballads," that's what he's saying to all of his people. He's a singer, he writes ballads. "But look, I'm much healthier than him. If Tamana started suffering from disease, surely his own spirits would be revived." Tamana's disease was Basavaya's health. However, at this time, Tamana had thought of yet another method of punishing Basavaya. Here he wasn't feeling so good, but he thought, being a wise person, that he could figure out a way to beat his rival. And so the first way, of course, was having a lot of property. That was the material way. And then the second way was to write songs, and he beat Basavaya at that, but now his health was getting a little bit worse. So he thought, I have to finish off this Basavaya while I'm still thinking. So he thought if he continued on the level of the body, Basavaya would go on offering stiff competition. But if his song, the ballads that he sang, were separated from his body, if there was no relation between the songs and his own flesh and blood, this is how his thoughts went. Because he's bringing this rivalry up to a highest spiritual level. What is life and death all about? Now he's talking with the owner's wife, and he says to her, that's when I had the realization how strange human nature can be. He realized, wow, my whole life is living for this rivalry. And this was the explanation he was giving to the owner's wife. He says to her, after he contemplates all of this, he goes, a man needs wealth, education, art, and many more things. But he doesn't tell what the many more things are. In the many more things, the best one is spiritual progress. So he's referring to his own life at that point. He was a rival of Basavaya. And he said, yet he, referring to himself, lives for some kind of unbearable vengeance. Without it, there would be no reason for his existence. And this is what Basavaya and Tamana were doing. They were just fighting with each other, trying to get on top of each other. And that was the reason for the existence. And then he sees the owner's wife and sees that she's sort of understanding this, but he doesn't want to come across like a preacher. He says, this is not a real story. He says to her, this is not a real story, even though it was a real story about himself, okay? Only what I have heard somewhere. He heard it because he lived it. You may know that I subscribe to a daily. Every day he gets a newspaper delivered to the farm. And to you, I am just an old man. So now he goes back to this fiction, okay, of being an old man, because he wants the wife to understand what he's saying, but not in a preachy way, in a nice, friendly way. He says, after a particular age, and he's talking about himself, man loses his name. His age becomes important, and his name vanishes into thin air. Now I am an old man in this garden, your servant. I am also the person who reads the newspaper and looks after the garden properly. I conceived the story of Tamana and Basavaya when all of a sudden, now here he shows that he's reading the newspaper, because at this time in 1993, Russia told America, we're not your enemy, we're not going to fight with you. So what Tamana says, all of a sudden Russia told America, I am not your enemy, I shall not wage a war against you. And then he's thinking, what must have been the reaction of America, the sworn enemy of Russia? They had a big nuclear competition going between each other in the 70s and 80s. But by the 90s, Russia realized this is a waste of time. We can spend the money on our citizens and help with education and food rather than making all of these weapons. So probably you will not understand the agony and boredom of America once it knew that Russia was no longer an enemy. So America had to rethink their foreign policy. A nation is capable of withstanding strains like this, but a human cannot. I suffered the similar fate. I thought my death alone could destroy Basavaya. So instead of a war between two nations, the war was between Basavaya and Tamana. And he thought that the death of himself would finish off Basavaya. He wouldn't really be dead, but Basavaya would die. I gave up everything. He had 1,000 acres less what Basavaya had taken away from him. So he gave that up. He gave up his money, he gave up his house, and he walked away and started off. A few days after I left, Basavaya passed away. He had no more reason to live. And now Tamana, okay, is feeling that he's the one who caused Basavaya to die. So then he tells the wife, "My name is Tamana. After his death, I forgot all my songs and ballads. I, who was one famous, the most sought-after poet in my whole area, became a non-entity. Thus I avenged myself." He felt so bad about Basavaya dying that he just forgot about his songs, forgot about his money, forgot about everything, and was looking for a place to live the rest of his life. And so now he's starting to give specific advice to the owner's wife. He says to her, "Your husband is flourishing today. Your husband is flourishing today as a rich man. He is not amenable to any advice. When you have a lot of money, you think you know everything, okay? Especially new money. So man is so complicated that until the day of his death, he goes on living for some form of revenge or another, confronting one challenge or another." So this owner, the owner of the farm, has one challenge after another. He's making new friends. He's being invited to all these parties. He's having a new girlfriend. These are all challenges in the man's life. So what he's telling her in a roundabout way is, if you stay with your husband and love him always, he may change and become more of a spiritual being. You have to follow your Dharma no matter what your husband does. "Amma," he tells her, "do not think otherwise." Now he's looking at the reaction of the owner's wife, and she's a little bit bowled away by this. And he says, "Do not think otherwise. Just assume that I did not tell you any of this, or that it may have all happened in a dream." So he wants her to feel comfortable with the advice that he's given to her, and to realize that he had a farm with 10 acres and built it up to 1,000, and he's also built up their farm to a lot of acres, and now a richness is there. But he feels bad that because of this success, okay, many people have either died or had pain, okay? And then he in his own life realized that he had to pursue a higher course. Not a full spiritual course, but a higher course. He goes further. He says to her, "This is all I have to tell you. The laborers have started going home. This is sunset, so the people who are working on the farm started going home." And then he says, "The young child of Loka is one of the workers there, paints well. He is bedridden with fever. I shall pay him a visit." So Tamana knows what the workers are up to. He always goes with them and tries to make them feel good, so they don't make. So it's more like a big family. All right. So he gets up to leave, okay, and walks along, and now the story switches back, okay, to P. Lankesh. All right. This is the end of the story that Tamana tells the owner's wife. But P. Lankesh, okay, has seen this whole story as a flash. And then he says, "Forgive me," unable to elaborate. He can't go any further with the story. He can't tell you what happens to the wife, what happens to the owner, what happens even to the gardener. He can't tell you because this is all he saw. And he is just relating the story to you directly as he saw it. "I have told you whatever I felt, as it is. I had seen all this in a dream." Now, P. Lankesh knew at this point, okay, as he finished the story, that worldly success, okay, is not permanent. And he's trying to get the reader, which is us, okay, to think about this. What really is permanent, okay? But he didn't go further. He left you to think about it, that the spiritual success is the real reason for your life. All the other things are passing clouds. Thank you for your listening.